Leicester has a castle, but it's not a castle with the romantic grandeur of Warwick. There are no high walls, there are no tall towers where you can imagine maidens immured. This is Leicester's castle. It's an area, and with a bit of imagination you can trace the various sections of it. And this behind me, up this Jacob's ladder of a staircase, is the castle mound. It was probably the small defensive area that was the last resort in case there was any attack upon it. As far as I know, Leicester Castle was never attacked. It belonged to the Dukes of Lancaster, because they were the lords of the Newark, just next to the castle area. And when Henry IV became monarch, he was the Duke of Lancaster, as his father John of Gaunt had been, and so the title was passed into the royal family. To this day, our Queen, our Sovereign Lady, is the Duke of Lancaster. The castle mound isn't probably as big as it was. There's talk about how it was flattened at the top to make a bowling green. Now, which struck me as a rather silly place to have a bowling green. What if you bowled the ball too far, the wood too far, and it rolled down the side? But that at least is the story. And if you look around, you can see vestiges of the old castle. I mean, down here, for instance, there is what is fondly called John of Gaunt's wine cellar. Probably nothing to do with John of Gaunt, probably earlier, but a fine set of medieval masonry. Over that way, you can trace the wall of the castle, huge, deliberately intimidating. At the moment, it divides St Mary di Castro from Newark House's museum. If you go out that way of the castle area, you have a very fine half-timbered gateway. That was probably the way in which the kings and the royalty came in. When he first came to Leicester, Richard III talks about being at my castle in Leicester. He must have come in that way. And that's the route that, if he did come here, Chaucer must have taken. From the top of the castle mound, you can see quite a lot of ancient Leicester. For instance, in that direction, over towards the Newark, you can see the back of the house built for the chantry priests who served St Mary of the Newark, the great medieval church that was demolished at the Reformation. And next to it, attached to it in fact, you can see the roof line of Newark House. It's not exactly medieval, probably built about 1600, but certainly part of the ancient fabric of Leicester. Coming round this way, you can see the tower of St Mary di Castro Church, currently without its spire. And this way, you can see the front of the castle hall, the great hall of Leicester Castle. The frontage is of brick and is very late 17th century, but inside you have a huge medieval space, an enormous roof. And in John Wesley's day, it would have been a huge open space with all the timbers visible. Early in the 19th century, it was divided into two courts, and at the moment it's being divided up again as part of De Montfort University's expansion. Hence all the builders' signs and the rattle of building activity. But in front of that, or rather between that hall and St Mary di Castro, you can see the Castle Green, the place on which in 1770 John Wesley came to preach. As with Wesley's preaching in Buckclose Lane, he didn't record what the subject of his sermon was. All we know is that reports were that there was a good crowd of people and a tiny incident of potential drama. Preaching in public places was something that a lot of people suspected. It was associated with the nonconformists. Indeed, It was John Wesley who learned outdoor preaching from George Whitefield, one of the Congregationalists of his time. And so it may well be that someone objecting to this decided to lay a decoy. A man came shouting, "Fresh salmon." Presumably the emphasis was not on the salmon, but on fresh. But as John Wesley recorded in his journal, he may as well have saved his pains because nobody took any notice of him. And that incident, the preaching and the man hawking fresh salmon, is recorded in this plaque, placed here to record the visit of one of the momentous people of the 18th century. And this is the entrance from Castle Street to the castle area. Very grand, mid-15th century, a high-class building. You can see this because the studs, the vertical members, the wooden members, now painted black, are very close together, which suggests there's a lot of them, which means it was quite a rich, a costly undertaking. And just by it is St Mary de Castro, the church of the castle, with innumerable associations with royalty. There is a report that towards the end of his preaching it started to rain and he was refused admission to St Mary de Castro. If that is true, it was made up for many years later when David Corley, the then vicar, invited some Methodists in who were also holding a service there, and when it had also started to rain. Because the meeting broke up, John Wesley left. It looks as if he left by going down towards the Newark, because from the Newark it's only a short distance to Millstone Lane, where the barn, the tabernacle, stood. Castle Green and Buckclose Lane have this in common. They were both on the edge of things. Buckclose Lane by the line of the old city wall, and the Castle Green, still in the 18th century, somewhat detached from Leicester. The Newark and the castle were a little distance from where most people lived in 18th century Leicester. And so again it underlines this point about the Methodists. They were enthusiastic, they were zealous, they had rediscovered the national religion, but they were still outsiders to the extent that they met on the edges, on the margins. Maybe they thought that Jesus must have been a bit like that too.